hopefully your last lesson you guys understood that energy flows. And like basically last week you should have been able to understand that energy flows from the sun, okay, to a plant, right? So here's a plant, and then it flows from a plant to like an animal, and it then flows, right? And then it gets stored in like tissue. So this is like, imagine this is sugar. It gets stored, and let's say you eat that animal. Well, that energy flows to you, right? So energy flows. All energy starts with the sun. When we talked about trophic levels last week, each trophic level refers to an energy level. So plants are always on the first trophic level because they occupy the first energy level. The animal would be on the second trophic level, and we would be in the third trophic level. Because why? We're the third one to receive the original energy that came from the sun, right? So the original energy is the sun. The plants harvest it first, so they're in the first trophic level. Then there is the animal, and then there's us, right? And you should have learned like this plant is a producer because it produces its own food, because that's what plants do. They undergo photosynthesis, so they produce their own food. And this can be like a carnivore, which eats animals, or it could be a herbivore, which eats animals and plants. Well, in this case, it has to be a herbivore because it's eating the plant. We are carnivores, but we could also be omnivores. We're actually omnivores because we can eat both animals and plants, right? And like if this is a producer in the first trophic level, then this is the primary consumer because this is the first thing to consume this. And then we become a secondary consumer because we are the second thing to consume it. So this is an example of how energy flows, starting with the sun, original source of energy, flows through like a food chain or a food web. So that was last week. Now this week we are doing cycling of matter. So if energy flows from one organism to the other, matter is recycled. So what does that mean? Well, energy is like some kind of abstract concept. It comes from the sun, right? It's neither created nor destroyed, right? We emit energy every day in the form of heat, right? But we are not just energy being. We are made up of matter, okay? So matter is anything that has mass, okay, and takes up space. That's matter, right? So we are made up of matter, and matter that makes us up is recycled. So that means when you die, right? So let's say this is a person and they die. That matter that made up their body, so matter being their DNA, matter being their protein that makes up their bodies, matter being the sugar that they store in their body, right? Their skin is made up of matter, their eyes, their hair, all of that, right, is matter, and all of that is returned to the soil. And it's returned to the soil because like you have bacteria that decompose you and worms, okay? They use up oxygen, so they're aerobic, and they use up that oxygen to basically break you down into your elements. So that means it's breaking you down into like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, right? It's breaking you down into the elements that you're actually made up of. Because if you were to take a look at DNA carefully, DNA is actually made up of nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and hydrogen. So those are the things that make up DNA. And when you die and you go into the soil, all these nutrients are returned to the soil. Now, why are they returned to the soil? Because then they are used by the plant, right? And it takes all that nutrient up through its root, all that, I don't know, carbon that was part of your body, all the nitrogen that was part of your body, all of that was once you, it actually uses it to create new life, a new plant that an animal eats, right? And in this way, a part of who you are will always kind of live because you are going to be recycled, you're going to be used by another organism, and then if that plant uptakes that carbon that was part of you, and then now that animal eats that carbon that was part of you, well, now that animal has you inside of it. So that's matter. And matter is recycled, and it's really important that matter is recycled because if it wasn't, so imagine like you were dead and you weren't broken down, okay, and you stayed in the soil dead, well, imagine all the dead things that would pile up in the soil over the years. And I mean, the earth would basically be uninhabitable because of all the living things that would have died, that would have piled up because we didn't recycle it. In fact, things have been recycled, and like even like imagine like back in the age of the dinosaurs, like when dinosaurs were like, you know, let's say this dinosaur, you know, became dead and it was buried in the ground, right? And maybe it was broken down by the soil, or decomposers broke it down, so now the parts of the dinosaur is in the soil, and then maybe a plant took it up, and this matter that made up the dinosaur was continually recycled over millions and millions and millions of years, and now maybe that dinosaur, part of that dinosaur is in your body, right? I don't know, the same water that dinosaur drank might this be the same water that you just had this morning. So that is how matter is recycled. Now, there are a few cycling of matter cycles that you gotta know. You gotta know the water cycle. But like, guys, that is so easy. Like, if you know what evaporation, condensation, and precipitation is from grade 7, then you're good, right? So you have a body of water, it evaporates, it makes a cloud, which condenses, and then the rain falls as precipitation. Sometimes you have what's called a surface runoff, which just means the water runs down the surface. Sometimes you have it collecting in the soil, and you get this water table, which just means this there's this table of water under the soil, and sometimes it's deep and sometimes it's not. And if you dig deep enough, you can find the water table and you build a well and you can drink from the well, right? That's like the water cycle. Sometimes when it rains, and let's say this is like the soil and here's a plant, sometimes the water like leaches nutrients. So like if there's nutrients in the soil, like the nitrogen that I talked about, sometimes the rain will leach the nutrients, so the nutrients end up going down, 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 and that's what leaching is. And basically, I mean, the water cycle is pretty easy, and that's not the one I'm really concerned about. The next cycle we're going to be doing is going to be the carbon-oxygen cycle. So this one is actually not that difficult either. The carbon-oxygen cycle is the way carbon and oxygen are recycled. Okay, well, I'm going to have to pause here. I'm going to do the carbon-oxygen in my next lesson. Sorry.